They laughed the moment the lawyer said $1. It was the sound of people who have won since birth. The sound that always reminded me I was the error in the family photo. But I did not come for the money. I came to watch them break. Grandfather left me 3 words: she knows why. And when the lawyer finally asked me the only question that mattered, their laughter died in their throats. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Like you were just a glitch in their perfect, polished software? Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I did not cry. I did not even blink. In my line of work, you learn that emotions are just noise. As a federal investigator, I deal in data, and right now, the data was telling me exactly what I expected. My mother, Melissa, was leaning back in her velvet chair, her diamonds catching the light of the Chicago skyline. My father, Christopher, was swirling a glass of 30-year-old scotch, looking like a man who had just won the lottery. Beside them, my sister Kayla was already typing on her phone, probably drafting a social media post about her $1 million windfall. To them, this was a victory lap. To me, it was a balance sheet that finally needed to be closed. I had been the silent investor in their version of family for 29 years, footing the emotional bill while they overran the account. I looked down at the crisp $1 bill the lawyer placed on the mahogany table. It was an insult, a tiny, paper-thin slap to the face intended to remind me of my place. I reached into my blazer pocket. My fingers brushed against the small, heavy card Richard had given me 2 weeks before he passed. It was a biometric access card, cold and metallic. He had pressed it into my palm at the hospital, his eyes sharper than they had been in years. He did not say he loved me. He did not say he was sorry for the 10 years of silence. He just whispered 3 words that had been echoing in my head ever since. She knows why. I looked at Melissa. Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp and assessing. She was not looking for a daughter. She was looking for a threat. When she saw me pick up the $1 bill with a steady hand, her smirk faltered just a fraction. "You are remarkably calm, Madison," my father said, his voice booming with a confidence that felt manufactured. "I suppose after all those years playing at being a government agent, you have finally learned to accept the reality of things. You were never part of the inner circle. Richard knew that. We all knew that." "I accept the bequest," I said. My voice was clinical, factual, lethal. I did not ask for a larger share. I did not plead for recognition. In fact, I think $1 is exactly what this moment is worth. I saw the way Christopher's grip tightened on his glass. He did not like the lack of a reaction. He wanted a breakdown. He wanted me to prove I was the unstable one, the liability they had tried to write out of the family history books. Instead, I gave them a smile that did not reach my eyes. It was a professional smile, the kind I give to targets right before the handcuffs click shut. I stood up, the biometric card hidden in my palm. The room smelled like expensive perfume and old lies. Melissa shifted uncomfortably, her hand going to her pearls. She knew that card existed. Or at least, she knew Richard had a secret he had kept even from her. "If that is all," I said, "I have an audit to prepare for." Christopher let out a sharp, forced laugh. "An audit? For what? Your tiny apartment? Your government salary?" "For the truth, Dad," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I am interested to see if your books are as clean as your suits." I walked toward the door, feeling their eyes burning into my back. This was not a breakdown. It was an opening move. The $1 bill was in my pocket, but the real power was in my hand. The sting across my cheek did not just leave a physical mark. It was the formal termination of our contract. 10 years have passed, but I can still smell the expensive tobacco and old leather of that library. I was 19 years old, still naive enough to believe that terms like integrity and family actually meant something in this household. I had found the discrepancy. $85 million meant for a disaster relief fund had been rerouted through 3 shell companies to pay for my mother's new diamond collection. I remember showing the ledger to Christopher. I thought he would be shocked. I thought he would want to fix it. Instead, he just leaned back in his chair and told me that I should learn to mind the business that would one day sustain me. When I refused to stay silent, Melissa did not hesitate. The slap was clinical, followed by a sentence that would define the next decade of my life. "You are a software error, Madison," she hissed, her eyes like cold glass. "A glitch in a system we spent 20 years perfecting. And glitches are deleted." There is a specific psychological term for what was happening in that room. It is called the trap of cruel normalization. In families where net worth is the only metric of value, empathy is viewed as a luxury the balance sheet cannot afford. Christopher and Melissa had not just stopped loving me, they had dehumanized me. To them, I was not a daughter. I was a defective product that was disrupting the efficiency of their greed. They had spent so many years justifying their own malice that they truly believed their cruelty was a form of management. I was on the sidewalk 5 minutes later with 2 suitcases and exactly $0 in my pocket. Christopher had already called the bank to freeze my accounts before I even reached the front door. They did not see it as an act of betrayal. They saw it as liquidating a liability. In their world, if you are not an asset that can be leveraged, you are an error that must be erased. They had normalized their own shadows until they could not see the darkness anymore. I remember standing in the rain that night, looking up at the glowing windows of the penthouse. I did not cry. I did not ask why. I realized then that my compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and I was finally closing the account. I walked away from that house with nothing, but for the first time, my debt to their expectations was paid in full. I spent the next 10 years building my own infrastructure, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, until I was no longer a glitch. I became a different kind of signal, the kind that detects the exact type of rot they were trying to hide. That night, as I slept on a bus station bench, I made a promise to myself. I was not going to spend my life trying to be an asset in their version of a family. I was going to become the auditor they never saw coming. The flash of a smartphone camera is a specific kind of violence in the digital age. It is not just a capture, it is the weaponization of perception. Kayla was already live. I could see the glow of her screen reflecting in her eyes that were currently scanning the room for the most profitable angle of my humiliation. She did not look like a sister mourning her grandfather. She looked like a producer directing a high-stakes reality show, and I was the designated villain. I stood by the window, the biometric card still heavy in my hand, as the notification chimes from 2,000 different phones began to ripple through the penthouse like a digital fever. My mother, Melissa, did not miss a beat. She saw the camera, and the grieving mother mask was applied with clinical precision. She stepped into the frame, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief that probably cost $300. A small price for the sympathy she was currently harvesting from 3 million followers. Kayla leaned into her microphone, her voice a hushed, dramatic whisper that carried perfectly across the marble floor. "Hi guys, I cannot even believe it," she breathed into the lens. "My sister, Madison. She actually showed up. After 10 years of silence, she is back the moment there is a dollar to be made. It is so heartbreaking for my parents. We just wanted a quiet memorial, but some people cannot help but be toxic." The screen on her tripod flashed with heart symbols and angry faces. The digital mob was waking up. I watched the comments scroll by in real time on a tablet left on a nearby side table. "Gold digger. Trash. Look at how cold she looks." I did not feel the sting this time. To an investigator, this was not an insult. It was metadata. It was a recorded history of their malice. They were not shocked by my presence. They were performing for an audience they had spent a decade cultivating. Their love was a subscription service, and since I had stopped paying the fee years ago, I was being canceled in front of the world. The penthouse air felt thick with the scent of lilies and the ozone of high-end electronics. Christopher joined them in the frame, his arm heavy around Melissa's shoulders, projecting the image of a pillar of strength being eroded by an ungrateful child. He looked over at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. There was no grief in his eyes, only a cold, transactional victory. He thought the live stream was the final nail in my coffin. He thought that by destroying my reputation, he was making the $1 bequest a permanent verdict. He did not realize that in my world, the louder the noise, the easier it is to detect the signal of the lie. I checked my watch. 12:05. The smear was peaking. The metrics were perfect. Kayla was laughing now, a sharp, bright sound that cut through the somber music, while her followers called for my head. I did not answer a single one of their stares. I did not try to defend myself to the camera. I simply tightened my grip on the biometric card. They were so busy curating the narrative of my failure that they had not noticed the ledger was about to be rebalanced. This was not a party anymore. It was a crime scene, and the evidence was currently being broadcast to 3 million witnesses. Marianne walked through the crowd like a razor through silk. She did not look at the cameras, and she certainly did not look at my mother's performance. She sat down next to me, her movements precise and heavy with the weight of the law. She was the only person in this room who did not smell like desperation or expensive perfume. She smelled like old paper and ironclad intent. She placed a heavy leather folder on the mahogany table, directly in front of Christopher. My father's eyes lit up with that familiar, predatory glow. He did not see an attorney. He saw a gatekeeper holding the keys to $1 million in immediate liquid assets. Marianne did not offer a greeting. She simply opened the folder to a page marked with a signature tab. To expedite the transfer of the primary bequest, Marianne said, her voice a flat, clinical drone, the estate requires a standard waiver of claims. It releases the executor from liability and confirms your acceptance of the asset inventory as stated. Christopher let out a short, dismissive breath. Of course. We have been over this with our own team. It is standard boilerplate. He picked up the heavy fountain pen, twirling it with the arrogance of a man who thought he had already won. He did not read the text. He did not ask a single question. To him, reading fine print was a task for the little people. He signed his name with a flourish, a sharp, scratching sound that felt like a nail in a coffin. Melissa followed immediately, her smile reaching her eyes for the first time all day. They were so blinded by the immediate payout of $1 million that they did not even notice the silence from Marianne or the steady gaze I was holding. They had just signed Clause 4.2. In their haste and their greed, they had missed the specific language. It stated that by accepting this immediate disbursement, they were voluntarily consenting to a full, unrestricted federal audit of every associated account to satisfy anti-money laundering regulations. They thought they were signing for a fortune. In reality, they had just authorized a search warrant for their own crimes. Christopher leaned back, looking at me with a smirk that was meant to be the final insult. There it is, Madison. The business is closed. You can take your $1 and leave now. I did not answer. I just watched Marianne close the folder. She checked her watch. 12:15. The trap was locked. They were not shocked by what they had done. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. Inside, my mind glowed with a different kind of sunrise. The kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I stood by the mahogany table, the biometric card resting in my palm like a dormant weapon. Christopher was still smiling, his teeth bared in that sharp, predatory grin that had always meant I was the loser in his latest game. I did not smile back. I simply leaned forward and placed the card against the silver terminal in the center of the room. The light on the reader flickered from red to a cold, clinical blue. Instantly, every high-definition screen in the penthouse, the ones Kayla had been using to broadcast my humiliation, switched to a single, encrypted feed. Richard's face appeared. He looked older than I remembered, his skin like yellowed parchment, but his eyes were still the sharpest things in the room. The audio was low, raspy, and heavy with the weight of a dying man's intent. If you are watching this, Richard said, his voice rippling through the silent penthouse, then my children have already proven their greed is greater than their caution. Christopher's glass of 30-year-old scotch froze halfway to his lips. Melissa's grieving mother mask shattered, leaving behind a face of raw, primitive fear. Richard did not waste time with sentiment. He laid it out in the language of a takeover. The $85 million my parents had spent 10 years siphoning through a maze of shell companies in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. He showed the receipts. He showed the digital signatures. He He showed the exact moment they had decided the $85 million meant for disaster relief was better spent on Melissa's jewelry collection. Then, the video shifted. Richard looked directly into the camera, and for the first time in 29 years, I saw the watcher's silent regret. "Madison," he said, his voice softening just a fraction, "I know you have spent 10 years wondering why I did not stop them when they threw you out." He paused, a rattle in his chest echoing in the cavernous room. "I stayed silent because I needed to quarantine you. I knew the rot in this house was terminal, and I needed the only clean signal in this family to stay far away from the noise. I let you go into the cold because the cold preserves things," Richard continued, his eyes locked on mine from across the digital divide. "It makes you hard. It makes you sharp. I needed you to become the auditor they could not buy, the investigator they could not see, and the witness they could not silence. The $1 bill was the decoy to bring you into this room today, Madison. The biometric card is the kill switch." The video cut to black. The room remained silent for 5 seconds, the only sound being the soft hum of the electronics and the frantic breathing of my mother. Melissa lunged forward, her hands clawing at the air as if she could pull the images back into the screens. She turned to me, her eyes wild with a sudden, horrific realization. I was not just the software error they had deleted 10 years ago. I was the only person in the room holding the master key to their survival, and Richard had just authorized me to liquidate their entire existence. Marian stood up and adjusted her glasses, her eyes fixed on mine with the intensity of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. The penthouse had become a tomb of silence as she reached for the second partition of the leather portfolio. "Madison," she said, her voice cutting through the static of my mother's panic like a surgical blade. "The conditions of the testator have been met. Are you prepared to activate the sealed codicil?" My heart did not race. It settled into a cold, rhythmic certainty. I looked at Melissa, whose face was now the color of old ash, and at Christopher, whose hand was trembling so violently he had to set his glass of scotch down on the mahogany table. "Yes," I said. The word was a single, heavy bullet. I tapped the screen of the silver terminal one final time. The system executed the command Richard had spent years encrypting. Instantly, every phone in the room buzzed with a simultaneous, haunting notification. Kayla shrieked as her livestream feed turned into a black screen with a government seal. Her 3 million followers watched her world go dark in real time. Christopher's phone chimed with an urgent alert from his primary bank. Every account, every credit line, every asset associated with the family name had been frozen by federal order. This was the moment they realized the truth. Their power was a grand illusion. They had spent decades believing they were untouchable because of the numbers in their bank accounts. But that status was a suit they had rented with stolen funds, and I had just canceled the lease. Without the money to buy silence and loyalty, they were not a dynasty. They were just 3 terrified strangers in an expensive room. The heavy doors of the penthouse opened, and 4 men in gray suits entered without an invitation. They did not look at the art or the view. They showed their badges: Department of Justice, Organized Crime Division. Agent Miller stepped forward, his voice calm and bored. "Christopher and Melissa, we have a federal warrant for the seizure of all electronic devices and financial records related to the family foundation." I walked over to where my father sat, staring blankly at the table as his carefully constructed life disintegrated. I reached into my pocket and pulled out that single, crisp $1 bill. I placed it on the polished walnut surface right next to his glass of 30-year-old scotch. "You were right, Dad," I said softly, the words feeling like the first honest thing I had ever told him. "I was only worth $1 to this family. But you forgot one thing." I leaned in, my voice a lethal whisper. "It only costs $1 to buy the truth." The elevator door slid shut, cutting out the sound of Melissa screaming my name and the lawyers shouting about jurisdiction. As the display numbers dropped toward the lobby, I felt the crushing weight of 10 years finally lifting from my chest. The $85 million was not mine to keep, and Richard had known I would never want it. It was already being wired into the Madison Foundation, a blind trust one had spent the last 3 months designing. Its purpose was to provide legal and financial support for children who had been exploited by their own families. It was the only way to turn my parents' greed into a legacy that actually meant something. I walked out of the building and into the Chicago morning. The sky was beginning to turn a pale, honest blue. The first sunrise I had seen that did not feel like a countdown. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my contacts. I did not hesitate. I hit delete. No more debt. No more noise. Just the silence of a clean ledger. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in my life, the air did not smell like old money and lies. It smelled like freedom. If you believe that integrity and finding your own peace is the sweetest revenge, give this video a like. Do not forget to share your own story in the comments so we can keep building this community together. I will see you in the next one.